You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Well, happy Wednesday evening, folks. Tuesday evening. Sorry, I'm always a day ahead of myself, or maybe I'm almost a full week behind. Well, this is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my program, The Intrepid, broadcast right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio, and you can find out the schedule over there where he is playing reruns of this show presently. And you could also, of course, like many of you are, most of you, everyone, as a matter of fact, who's seeing this show tonight live is seeing it here on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts for any and all future viewers of this show who may not know where they are. So welcome to the program tonight. Audrey! I just saw that pop up. How you doing? Hey, Elderberry. Susie Q, good to see you. I have no doubt your signal's a little weak being out there in the country as far as you are. I don't know how you get any kind of reception out there at all. So welcome to the show. I'm glad you made it in. Master Finn, good to see you, brother. Glad you're in. And people keep coming in, and so it's good to see you here. Those of you hanging in the wings, you are welcome to not just view the show, but to come on into the chat room and enjoy chatting with the other people here or sharing your views or whatever it may be. That is all welcome here. And as you can tell, while this is my home studio, it's not a professional studio. We don't have soundproofed walls or thick-tempered glass, but we do have microphones that pick up my children shouting in the other part of the house. So there you go. That's for all of you if you were wondering what banshee was keening out the death of some great Irish warrior in the background. It's only my children. So here's the link, by the way. I've just posted it in the chat room. That's the link if you wish to join me in conversation live right here on this screen. And just have your mic ready and you have your video camera set up and ready to go so we can see you as well. And it'll be good to have you here. And so, Doug Stack, how you doing, brother? Good to see you. I hope your second day of being officially in business has gone well for you. And, working out the kinks. But you'll be working out kinks for months. So hopefully that will all work to your favor. And those of you who have followed this saga of my white Suburban, my 17-year-old white Suburban, we think it's the fuel pump, and my neighbor's going to change that out for me in a couple of days. And because he works on that stuff, he's got to drop the gas tank. He said, kind of drive it around, use up as much gas as you can. And it does run, folks. It's just if you run it too long, the fuel pump stops engaging. And that means sooner or later it's going to die. So hopefully by the end of this week, we will have a 17-year-old white Suburban with beautiful tan leather interior. It's even got the little video screen that drops down for the kids in the back. And it's kind of loaded. The electric's kind of screwy sometimes. The passenger window doesn't work. So we'll have to work on that next. But getting it so it's running and reliable is what we're after. And I think we're almost there. So that saga will soon come to an end. By the way, I wanted to ask, did any of you ever see the movie The Life of Pi? We watched that a while back. It's about the young man from India who went down in a shipwreck and lost his whole family, and the only ones surviving on his lifeboat were he and this wild Bengal tiger that had been at the zoo. And it was loose, and he was afraid through the first portion of this that the thing was going to eat him for food. It was vicious, terrifying tiger. And it's how they developed an understanding. It wasn't like a Disney cartoon. They didn't start talking to each other in sentences or anything. But if you've seen the movie, it's very moving. And if you've seen that, and you remember, Audrey, you remember how the stories at the end, when he's talking to the insurance company and he has to give the story as a teenager to the insurance company, how they wanted to force him to change his story because his story was so unbelievable. And so he gave them another story. And I asked my son Flynn, who was sitting, I caught like the last 20 minutes of it with them a little earlier, about an hour ago. And it's funny how you can walk in on a movie like that is so well written, so well performed, and so moving and meaningful when the character, as an older man now, a mature male, is relating the story. The place where his eyes well up with tears, and you just see the tears just well up and drip over the edge of his lower eyelid, and or his eye socket, and it was very moving as he's talking about this story. So I asked Flynn when it was all over. I said, "So Flynn, which story was the true story?" And he says, "Man, I don't know." And so, what do you think, Audrey? Was it the original story, the story of the whole movie, or was a movie a symbolic retelling of the other story he told? Very interesting stuff. Hey, Helene Moody, good to see you. Morning, she says. Good to see you. What is it over there? It's about 3 a.m. your time, Helene. So good to see you here. Glad that you're here. Are you still up, or did you just get up? That's what I always ask my friends when they join me from Great Britain, anywhere over there. So, yeah, Life of Pi, though, was an excellent movie. Who else is here? I don't think anybody new has slipped in, although the numbers are a little higher. So I want to welcome you all and thank you for being here tonight. You know, for several days, I've had a tab open on my browser because there's a book I noticed when I was doing a little bit of research. And I want to pick up this book. Now, it might be a mistake because the book might be whack for all I know. But it's a paperback that I'm picking up. And the author is Jose Saramago. I think it's got Jose Saramago and then Giovanni Pantiero as the translator. And the title is The Gospel According to Jesus Christ. And it sounded interesting to me. This is the description of the book. It calls it a wry fictional account of the life of Christ by 1998 Nobel laureate in literature, illuminated by ferocious wit, gentle passion, and poetry, said the Los Angeles Times Book Review. And for Jose Saramago, the life of Jesus Christ and the story of his passion were things of this earth. A child crying, a gust of wind, the caress of a woman half asleep, the bleat of a goat or the bark of a dog, a prayer uttered in the grayish morning light. The Holy Family reflects the real complexities of any family, but this is realism filled with vision, dream, and omen. Saramago's deft psychological portrait of a savior who is at once the son of God and a young man of this earth is an expert interweaving of poetry and irony, spirituality and irreverence. The result is nothing less than a brilliant skeptic's wry inquest into the meaning of God and human existence. And that captured me when I read. That's just the Amazon description of the book, because I saw the book mentioned and I thought, might this be worth reading? I looked it up over on Goodreads, and it says this is a skeptic's journey into the meaning of God and of human existence. At once an ironic rendering of the life of Christ and a beautiful novel. Saramago's tale has sparked intense discussion about the meaning of Christianity and the church as an institution. translated by Giovanni Pontiero. And there are all kinds of comments on this, and I wanted to read a couple of these to see what you might think of this. And if you think that this would be a good book to get and maybe a good book to review. Here are comments from several people, just independent people over on Goodreads. And Vit Babenko rated it 5 stars and said, "And Jesus said unto him, No man, having put his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God." That's Luke 9:62, by the way. He says, Jose Saramago put his hand to the quill and looked back. He looked back deep into the past. Thought, when all is said and done, as others and we ourselves have observed before, is like a great ball of thread coiled around itself, loose in places, taut in others, inside our head. It's impossible to know its full extent. One would have to unwind, then measure it. But however hard one tries or pretends to try, this cannot be done without assistance. One day, someone will come and tell us where to cut the cord that ties man to his navel and thought to its origin. Jose Saramago is exactly that someone. He came to retell us the greatest story of all time, and to put our thoughts straight, or at least to make them less wry. Human words are like shadows, and shadows cannot explain light. And between shadow and light stands the opaque body from which words are born. Who is Jesus? Is he God or man? Or did he get stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea? For God, he is just a cat's paw, and for devil, he is just a decoy. He tries to set rules, but he's just a toy played in a higher heavenly game. Forgetting is all too easy. That is life. In the end, any actual human life becomes forgotten and sinks into oblivion, and only myth and legend are eternal. That was pretty interesting words about the book. Somebody else wrote, there are 2 topics that are both sensitive and dangerous to discuss, both in our everyday lives and in online forums: politics and religion. I refuse to get into discourse on either subject, even with the majority of close friends and family members. I have to know someone quite well and trust him or her implicitly before engaging in real-life conversations. Have you guys noticed that? You have to know somebody really well before engaging them in real-life conversations, not just flotsam of social media. Therefore, this review is not going to contain much substance, not just because I would like to avoid debate, but also due to the fact that I am not even close to being informed enough to take on the Bible and any controversial writings that follow it. This person goes on to say, I've not read the Bible. I'm familiar with many of the stories, however. I'm not a religious person, but I'm inquisitive and like to inform myself about the beliefs of others. I've been very curious about Saramago's novel for quite some time and couldn't quite get the idea out of my head that I needed to read this. So I made it a goal for 2021 and knocked it off early. I'm very glad I did. First of all, I found that it confirmed some of my own ideas about Jesus, as well as the poor image of women that has been promoted by a number of world religions, something that irks me to no end. Jesus is portrayed here as a human being with questions, doubts, and desires. Think about Jesus when you think about this. Think about the story of him and wonder about these responses. Jesus is presented as a human being with questions, doubts, and desires. Many of the gospel stories that we know are told from a very different perspective. I nearly started to count the number of times Saramago reminds us, with irony of course, the way women were perceived. Here are a couple of examples for which I imagine the author writing at his desk with tongue-in-cheek. Quote, unlike Joseph, her husband, Mary is neither upright nor pious, but she is not to blame for this. The blame lies with the language she speaks, if not with the men who invented her, or who invented it, the language. Because that language has no feminine form for the words upright and pious. Which part of women's nature of a woman's nature is demonic, and which divine, and what kind of humanity they have? I was talking about women who generate beings such as ourselves, and who may be responsible, perhaps unknowingly, for this duality in our nature, which is base and yet so noble, virtuous and yet so wicked, tranquil and yet so troubled, meek and yet so rebellious. That's as far as I go down this road, said this personal reviewer. I have a lot of thoughts swirling around in my head, and they're likely to stay there, simmering. This is my first experience with Saramango. I'll just finish up with a couple of brief reflections on the writing. First of all, it was dense in subject matter especially. I often wanted to set this down and escape to something much lighter. Paragraphs are very lengthy, often going on for pages at a time. Anyone that resents a lack of quotation marks should be warned in advance. I don't have a problem with this. In fact, after the first couple of chapters, I grasped the flow of dialogue. The prose itself is tightly written and obviously skilled. There is no denying that Saramango was a master at his craft. However, I need to choose a different sort of novel altogether when I next pick him up, and I need to do so before long. I think we might have a bright future. We might have a bright future. But I've had my fill of anything remotely theological for quite some time, even if it does stand popular belief on its head. And she ends with this quote: "We refrain from asking a question because we are unprepared or simply too afraid to hear the answer. And when finally we summon the courage to ask, no answer is forthcoming." I thought that was a couple of interesting reviews of that book. So, I went ahead and I ordered the book, The Gospel According to Jesus Christ, A Skeptic's Journey into the Meaning of God and Human Existence, by Jose Saramago. Saramago. I've been saying it wrong. Saramago, I've been saying. I don't know where I picked up the N. Saramago or Maggio. I'm not sure which it is. Saramago. Sounds very Italian. So that's probably what it is. So there you go. That sounds like a good book, and I think I'm going to pick that up. Now, before I get to our topic of tonight, there's something I want to read you. There is a friend of mine who I've mentioned on this show before. He was somebody who was wrongly accused of rape. And in a setting, the Renaissance Festival setting. And I've mentioned him before. I don't want to get into too much detail. But he is a dear friend of mine. Been friends for over 20 years. And he, an incredibly creative man. He was the creative director out there. And he was also a business writer. And he used his festival experiences, his street theater experiences, to found an organization that catered to businesses. I think he called it Top Performer back in the years here. And how to achieve better business and better management of your business by being a top performer. And he put a lot of that into his time at the Renaissance Festival. I will even say that after my years at the Renaissance Festival, my ability to speak in public, my ability to hold my own in business really revolved around my ability to have stood on a street corner with 20,000 people circulating around me and talk to them all as if they were there to listen to me. It built my confidence up. So this is what he was all about. And I put an excerpt up on my Facebook page. You can go read this if you wish. But this friend of mine, in this case, it was 3 years ago, I think today, that he was arrested. But as writers normally do, he's writing about this experience. He's going to turn it into a book. And this allegation against him, a charge against him, he was booked officially for it. and awaiting trial. And then, of course, the young woman who anyone who knows anything knows that she was lying, fabricating a story. And there's a whole bit of conspiracy behind that would sink a lot of people if that was to be proven in court. Well, she ditched on court when the day of reckoning finally came to put her rapist behind bars. She didn't show up because she said she couldn't travel across state lines because of COVID. The judge dismissed it. I think the judge saw. He didn't give her a continuance. She didn't ask for one, as far as I know. So all this to say, my friend is exonerated, so to speak. It's been dismissed. Doesn't mean she couldn't pick it up again if she wanted to. It means for now, it's been put to bed. But what has happened in the meantime is a man who did not do this thing. And I got to tell you something. There are a few things I would stake my own life and reputation on. You know somebody so well that you know there are certain things they are not capable of doing. Were we all bad boys? Yeah. We all did our share of stuff at the festival. We all got into relationships and dalliances and little bits and pieces of this and that and the other thing. He was no different. But none of us were people that would force ourselves on someone else. And I know this about the character of this man. So, having said that, he lost just about everything he had. His whole life before him, his writing career, his publishing career, he did a lot of voice talent on radio and stuff like that. All of that wiped out and gone. His reputation destroyed, not because facts were proven in a court of law, but because the allegations existed. The newspaper posted his mugshot from the day they arrested him to book him for this. And he spent, I think, an overnight in jail or a weekend in jail. They made sure they arrested him on a Friday night so he couldn't get out till Monday. And all of this destroyed his reputation, which was big and popular. The same newspaper that did this to him had years before, over the previous several years, written several articles on him and his writing and his business management and all of this, and what an amazing man he is. But the juiciness of the sensational story superseded everything else and destroyed his reputation when he hadn't done a goddamn thing. And his wife, of course, very supportive of him through this whole thing. I love his wife dearly. Matter of fact, I was madly in love from a distance with his wife at the festival before I even knew him and knew her as a couple over 20 years ago, back in the late 90s. And I would stroll by the booth where she worked out there at the festival, and I would give her a rose every day and quote some Shakespeare and stuff like that. I wasn't courting her or wooing her. I was wooing her as a character from the street. But I always appreciated her and got to know them both around that time, and we'd been friends ever since. But she's very supportive of him, knows him better than anyone, and knows what a lie this all was and how it destroyed their lives. Now, they're good people. They're not like living in poverty somewhere. They're still doing okay. They're making it. But their lives fell from being one thing to a completely other thing. And so my friend wrote this little piece. He's got a website where you can go read his articles. And a lot of this are things he's compiling toward writing a book about this experience and the evils of it. And I grabbed this little excerpt. And I wrote, I'm posting this excerpt of a much longer article written by a dear friend of mine. Most people who know me know who this guy is. Most people local and in my circles. I said, it struck me quite deeply as I've been one to sometimes get trapped in looking backward at the receding wake rather than focusing forward on what could be. My friend said this. This is a quote now from his excerpt. Such arrogance, thinking the life I'd built was the only one I had, or that I could never be taken away. It could never be taken away. Such smallness to imagine other people could take away what is most important to me in my life, or worse, to endlessly harp about the ugly things that happened rather than look for the beauty that can happen yet again. What happened wasn't fair. It was evil. But I've had friends die in car accidents, sudden death from heart attacks, drinking themselves to death, dying of cancer at a young age, or suicide. None of that was fair, and they didn't get another day. But I do. I can pivot toward the living and take all the days I have left to make something of them. Time doesn't give a piss about healing all wounds, because wounds like this will never heal. But creative works, like writing this story or the art of photography, can be leveling, a scar tissue over this passing nightmare. End of quote. And I thought that was very moving, that he would write about this. So you can see what you think of that. I would love to put up a link to his, let's see if I can get into this. If you want to go take a look at his stuff, this is a link to the whole article, but you may not be able to read it without subscribing. There's a subscription, and he puts it up with a dollar amount on it. I pay like $5 a month to read his articles, only because I don't have lots of money to give him. And this link right here, it's rather long, but there's the link. You can go there. It's substack.com, and you can see his work there. And I think if you click on that, it asks you if you want to subscribe. And if you subscribe, you can look up the writings of this guy. I'm going to type his name, Dylan Dean. That's not his real name. That's a pen name. And you can look that up and see more about him and more about his story and more about what he's writing about. So there, let's dispense with that. I've spent the first half an hour of this show going through things that have struck me for the day, books I want to read, thoughts of the day. And let's get into last night. We talked about ghosts in Egypt and so on. But before we do that, maybe this is a good time to have a little cleansing of the palate from the first half to the second. So we're going to take a little 1.5 minute break, collect your thoughts, and we'll get back into this when I come back. So sit tight. I'll be right back with the topic of the night.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad, so he can take me to Disneyland.
You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Hey folks, welcome back to the program. Thanks for sitting in for the first half hour. Now this second half hour or so, should we tend to stray on time, that we're going to jump into the topic of the night. So thank you for listening to all that other good stuff. I think is good stuff. I could go on forever with all these different kinds of things that impress me, or things I read, books I want to read, stuff that I want to do and take a look at. So thanks for sitting in through that. And here we go. Hey, Dave Potter. How you doing? Good to see you, brother. And anybody else who may have strayed in while I was talking, Wesley Curry, good to see you. And who else we got in here who's snuck in? Scott Allen is here. Good to see you, brother. Good news, Scotty. Justice. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. Iowa X, good to see you. Any writer worth a damn should be arrested, said Iowa X. Excuse me?
I had my pickles.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. Here's Rowan, who has had her pickles. Well, we're just going to get into our topic for tonight. Here, now I can raise it back up a little bit. I'm going to get into our topic for tonight. We're going to talk about monsters and myths of Egypt, ancient Egypt.
You should tell them about when we watched The Conjuring.
Why don't you sit up? Because you're pushing me off my stool here. Well, I will tell them about it. We watched The Conjuring. She likes horror movies. All three of them over the last several days. So there you go. All right. You know what? I'm going to get on with my show.
I don't
so
have
tell everybody goodbye.
You're not supposed to go like that. I don't have a mustache.
Yep. So see where your face is hidden behind the logos up there? There you go.
Pickles.
All right. I'm going to have you go out of the room.
Pickles.
And take care. Come here, Ellie. If you want to say hi, you can say hi. There you go. Ellie wandered into, there she is. Ellie in the flesh eating toast. All right. Well, happy 9:30 at night. Go eat your toast. Go do what Mom says. See ya. Take the dog with you. Don't leave the dog in here. She'll howl and whine at the door. All right. Bye. Well, there we go. That couldn't have happened during the break I took at the bottom of the hour, could it? So there you go. All right. Let's move on. We're going to be talking about the monsters of Egypt. And you know what I did? Rather than going in depth, I've done kind of a light list of, not a complete or exhaustive list, but some of these ancient monsters and mythical creatures of ancient Egypt. Because last night we left off, remember we were talking last night about the soul, about the Ka, the Kat, the Ka, the Ba, and all of the things that comprised these, everything from a singular going into the afterlife, the field of reeds, as the ancient Egyptians used to call it. And through the dynastic time periods, they kept adding conditions on to the soul and what defined the soul, and finally up to 9 things. And we went through that pretty in depth last night. And we're going to go through, as Mandy Moo in Australia, we were talking a little bit today. She asked if I was going to say anything about Hathor, the calf goddess of Egypt. And I said, I'm going to, because I'm going to do a little series. We're segueing up to that on the gods of Egypt. And something about the gods of Egypt, they really are also the monsters and the mythologies of Egypt. If you want to read a good book that I think very acutely describes the whole Egyptian pantheon of gods, the wars between all the gods and all that, don't go watch the movie The Gods of Egypt. Nah, that's not it. Pick up Rick Riordan's work. Rick Riordan wrote a couple of series of young readers books, not young readers, young adults books. And so you're talking teens and upper teens and college age. He wrote the Percy and the Olympians series. He also wrote a few books on the Red Pyramid series with that young brother and sister in their early teens. And what he did in that was all the gods and the creatures and the characters that they meet up with and have to deal with are all the Egyptian gods, replaying the whole war between the gods back and forth. And so if you want to read a good book that's fictional, but it's very deep and rich and exciting and full of action and adventure and written for teenagers and adults, I enjoyed it too. Pick up The Red Pyramid by Rick Riordan. You'll really love that book. Steve Clark says it's great to see your kids. Thank you, Steve. You get 50 adults a day doing that, says Wesley. I missed something there, but we'll either get back to that or we won't. If I may comment, I consider that interpreting the Bible rather than accepting it as is the first assault by devils set upon changing it. Damn straight, Wesley. What a great way to look at it. I don't think if God was in charge of inspiring men to write scripture, did he inspire them to write something that you would need to have somebody else interpret for you? Or did he write it for the common people to understand it as it was? The deeper mysteries, as we talked about once before. So monsters and mythical creatures of Egypt is what we're on. In the Egyptian canon, so to speak, it's really difficult to distinguish all the monsters and all the mythical creatures from the gods of Egypt themselves. For example, how do you classify the cat-headed god Bastet or the jackal-headed god Anubis? Still, there are some figures that don't quite rise to the level of actual deities, functioning instead as either symbols of power or ruthlessness, or figures to be invoked as warnings to mischievous children. Now, we're going to go through the 8 most important monsters and mythical creatures of ancient Egypt. And certainly, to be sure, there are many, many more. But this ranges from the crocodile-headed chimera Ammit to the rearing cobra known as Urias. And you could see on the tonight's graphic for the show, I've got an image of Serpopard, I think is the way it's pronounced, Serpopard, S-E-R-P-O, Serpo, P-A-R-D, pard, Serpopard. And he is one of these creatures that we'll be discussing tonight. So let's look at the first one, Ammit, A-M-M-I-T, the devourer of the dead, he was known as. And he's a mythological chimera that's composed of the head of a crocodile, the forelimbs of a lion, and the hind limbs of a hippopotamus. So you've got a hippolionodile is what you've got here. Crocodile, lion, and hippopotamus. And Ammit was the personification of the man-eating predators that were so feared by the ancient Egyptians. You could go out to the canal and step down into the water to bathe your feet and maybe lose your legs or your life because the crocodiles were there. Now, it's very interesting. In Egypt now, you don't have the crocodiles. They are all down south of Aswan. The flooding of when they built the Aswan Dam and it created Lake Nasser. The crocodiles are all south of Lake Nasser. And so you start going up the Nile to the north, or down the Nile to the north, because it flows north to the Mediterranean. There are no crocodiles anymore. And we saw a little crocodile off the boat at Gebel El Silsila, which is about, I want to say it's 400 miles north of Aswan, and where Lake Nasser is. But we saw what looked like a little crocodile just hanging in the water, and he's floating down the river. He's not moving. He's got all his legs out, longer legs, and a long tail, and you could see him half under the water, and he's just floating down the river. And John got all excited, and he says, He says, the crocodile are the crocodile returning? And not that I think I'd want to play on the banks of the Nile or dive in off the boat after a hard day doing archaeological work and have crocodiles inhabiting the waters there. But and it turned out it was the cousin. There is a cousin to the crocodile, much smaller, and I can't think of the name of what it is, but that's what it ended up being. I've got some pictures of that thing floating down the Nile, and I took it with my long lens. So it was about 25 feet off the edge of the boat. So here we are. We're talking about Ammit, Ammit. According to the legend, after a person died, the Egyptian god Anubis weighed the deceased's heart on a scale against a single feather from Mut, M-A'-At, Mut, the goddess of truth. And if the heart was found wanting, it would be devoured by Ammit, and the individual's soul would be cast for eternity into fiery limbo. Think hell was original with Christianity? So, because it didn't exist for Judaism, the predecessor to Christianity. So, like many other Egyptians, monsters, the monsters on this Egyptian list, Ammit has been linked or even conflated with various obscure deities, including Tarawet, the goddess of conception and childbirth, and Bes, the protector of the heart and the hearth. Bes, I did a children's illustrated book on Bes. Bes, the nightmare defender, and the I can't remember the exact title of it, but Bes, the blue dwarf god, the dwarf king, with all the feathers off the top of his head, the feathered headdress, and the long staff with the crook at the end. And he had a snake, a serpent for a belt, and a leopard skin kind of sash and loincloth. And he was the nightmare defender. And it's a very lighthearted book, children's book that I did all the illustrations for. You may have seen some of them as I post these things. And so Bes was the protector. And sometimes Ammit gets conflated with these. But Ammit was this crocodile, hippopotamus, lion creature that devoured the soul if when Anubis weighed it against the feather of Mut and left it found wanting or a less than redeemed heart, you could say. It was Ammit that would eat the soul. And now number 2, Apep, A-P-E-P, the enemy of light. Now Apep was the arch enemy of Mut, the goddess of truth, who's mentioned in the previous story. Apep was a giant mythological snake that stretched for 50 feet from head to tail. And oddly enough, we now have fossilized evidence that some real-life snakes, like the elusively named Titanoboa of South America, actually attain these gigantic sizes. But according to legend, every morning the Egyptian sun god Ra engaged in a heated battle with Apep and coiled just below the horizon and could only shine his light after vanquishing his foe. And what's more, the subterranean movements of Apep were said to cause earthquakes, and its violent encounters with Set, the god of the desert, and it spawned terrifying thunderstorms. So Apep was one of these gods, and there are depictions of him on tombs, this snake that's coiled over and infinity symbols over and over and over and over and over and over again. And so that is the second of the monstrous creatures that exist. Number 3 is Bennu, the bird of fire. And I'm listening to, I don't know if it's as distracting to you as it is to me, but I'm hearing my kids all screaming. They're screaming at Rainey out there, and Rainey's trying to get them to do what she needs them to do. And so she's having a rough go out there. Nothing she can't handle. It just gets, after a while, it gets tiring. If you're a parent, you know what I mean. So, Bennu, the bird of fire. So the ancient source of the phoenix myth came from Bennu. And at least according to some authorities, Bennu, the bird god, was a familiar of Ra, as well as the animating spirit that powered creation. And in one tale, Bennu glides over the primordial waters of Nun, the father of the Egyptian gods. And more important for later European history, Bennu was also associated with the theme of rebirth and wound up immortalized by the Greek historian Herodotus as the phoenix, which he described in 500 BCE as a giant red and gold bird born anew every day like the sun. And later details about the mythical phoenix, such as its periodic destruction by fire, were added much later, but there's some speculation that even the word phoenix is a distant corruption of Bennu, believe it or not. And you can see it in the words, the P-H-O-E, or the F, the phonetic F sound, and the Bennu sound, the P-H, the Pennu, the Phoenix, the Bennu. Yeah, you get it. You get it. So that's the third, is the Bennu, the bird of fire. And by the way, there are some people, if you've seen my cover design for the novel I'm finishing up, The 10 Breaths of Ra, it shows Daniel Badcock, the Romani character, and he's holding a staff. And on the staff is that long slanted headpiece that you've seen it. You've seen pictures of it before. It's long and narrow and a bit curved and goes down to the staff. This is thought to be either an antelope, or some had thought it was a Bennu bird. So, interesting stuff. Unicorn is rhinoceros. Yeah, Wesley, it's interesting. I've heard that. It's interesting how the rhinoceros became this graceful horned horse that bleeds mercury. So, I don't see how the two look anything alike, but yeah, I've heard that before too. That the rhinos became the stories of the unicorns. So number 4, El Nadaha, the siren of the Nile. The siren, not necessarily a mermaid creature, but the siren. And she's a bit like a cross between the Little Mermaid, the siren of Greek myth, and that creepy girl from the Ring movies you would see coming up out of the well. El Nadaha has a relatively recent origin compared with the 5,000-year span of Egyptian mythology. So just within the past century, apparently, stories began to circulate in rural Egypt about a beautiful voice that calls by name to men walking the banks of the Nile. Desperate to get a look at this enchanting creature, the bewitched victims veer closer and closer to the water until he falls or is dragged in and drowned. El Nadaha is often adduced as being a classic genie, one of the jinn, which, unlike the other entities on this list, would place her in the Muslim rather than the classical Egyptian pantheon. So, next time you're walking down the Nile and you hear a beautiful, enchanting voice that makes you want to go closer to the water to hear it, this could be El Nadaha, the siren of the Nile. Now, you know what's interesting? This brings up a story totally unrelated to Egypt, but when Rocky Stucci and John Ward and I, about 5 years ago now, I think it was, we went to southern Minnesota, to the site out in the country, the rural country in the woods, looking for the foundations of an old boys' home that had been there 100 years earlier. And we found it. We found the foundations. There were also some old concrete bunkers built into the hillsides, trees totally covering them. And as we were walking away from this, it was mid-afternoon. There's wind blowing through the tall trees in the forest. And we're walking away from this thing. We picked up a lot of voices on the spirit box. And we were saying, you have to stay here. We're going to leave now. And there was nothing like super concrete. We just had picked up a few EVPs and voices coming through. And so as we're walking away through the woods, Rocky gets strangely drawn back. He turns around and he said, "Did you hear that voice?" And we all listened. And sure enough, we heard a female voice crying on the wind. And we thought, what's up and around? We're in the deep woods here. Where is this coming from? And we could see we were looking at the old bunker here in the hillside, trees all up on top of it, and vines and things hanging over. And we could see the trees all around us and see the wind blowing the leaves up on top. But we could hear, and it wasn't a trick of the ear. It was definitely a female voice that was crying. And we went up on top of this hill over the bunker, and we looked out, and it's all cornfields or farm fields and forest and all these things. There's nothing around us. There's no playground. We thought, is there a playground or a rest stop or something up there? It sounds like a child crying, and then the woman singing, or the woman crying. And we went up, there's no one around. Couldn't hear anything for miles and miles. And so this is like that keening. Was this something, what we deduced and finally concluded was that there was a spirit that was calling to us, and especially attaching to Rocky, trying to get him to not leave, to come back. Now, Barry Fitzgerald, you remember Irish Barry Fitzgerald, who was on the show a few weeks ago, talked about the voices that would come out of the caves, the things beneath our feet, the stories of people that were drawn into caves and drawn deeper and deeper because they could hear a voice calling for help. And then those people were never seen again. Or when they got back out and told the story, I kept going deeper because I kept hearing a voice calling for me, sometimes by name. So we got some of this on film. And there are films that are over on, well, they're here on my YouTube site. If you go down, scroll down, you'll find the videos of our paranormal escapades. The Witch's Cave and things like this was all that same trip. So you can go there and you can find that where there are scenes where we hear the calling back to us from the woods. Maybe a lot like this mythical creature of Egypt, the El Nadaha, the siren of the Nile. Something that calls out to you to get you to come back and re-engage. So let's see. What are we seeing over here in the chat room? Pickles, I see from Wesley Curry. Making a segue to my current hell. You have a bunch of negative bringing you down, but you have to somehow not let it get to you, says Elder Barry. So moving down through the chat room, I make up god-awful operas when alone to forget about it, says Wesley. So there you go. All right. Here we go. Let's we've got technically 5 minutes of the show left and still 4 of these creatures to go through. Number 5, the Griffin, or the Beast of War. The ultimate origins of the Griffin are shrouded in antiquity and mystery. We all know what the Griffin was. It had the, you've seen it. If you ever saw the Harry Potter movies, you saw the Griffin as depicted in those movies. You also saw the Phoenix, by the way. We know that this fearsome beast is mentioned in both ancient Iranian and ancient Egyptian texts. It's yet another chimera, which is this bundling together of different animals. Like Amet, the Griffin features the head, the wings, and the talons of an eagle grafted onto a lion's body. I think in Harry Potter, it's like a horse's body, isn't it? And since both eagles and lions are hunters, it's clear that the Griffin served as a symbol of war. And it also did double and triple duty as the king of all mythological monsters and the staunch guardian of priceless treasures. On that premise, that evolution applies every bit as much to the mythical creature as it does to those made of flesh and blood. The griffin must have been the best adapted monsters, one of the best adapted monsters in the Egyptian pantheon, and still going strong in the public imagination after 5,000 years, as per my mention of Harry Potter. All right. Moving on. Number 6, the Serpopard, the harbinger of chaos. And there's a depiction of him, a modern depiction of this Serpopard in the graphic for tonight's show. The Serpopard is an unusual example of a mythical creature for which no name has been adduced from the historical records. All we know is that depictions of creatures with the body of a leopard and the head of a snake, the neck and head of a snake, adorn various Egyptian ornaments. And when it comes to their presumed meaning, one classicist's guess is as good as another. So one theory is that the Serpopards represented the chaos and the barbarism that's lurking beyond the borders of Egypt during the pre-dynastic period over 5,000 years ago. But since these chimeras also feature in Mesopotamian art from the same time span, in pairs with necks entwined like a caduceus, they may also have served as symbols of vitality or masculinity, or as we've adapted the two uncoiled serpents as the sign of medicine and the caduceus. So that's the Serpopard. I told you these are going to be light and to the point. Now, it's number 7, of course, very familiar one, the Sphinx, the teller of riddles. And we're all familiar with the Great Sphinx, but there are sphinxes everywhere in Egypt. There are unfinished, partially carved sphinxes. It's much smaller. Think about the size of an SUV or something like that. All over Gebel El Silsila, John Ward and Maria Nilsson's archaeological site. So the sphinxes aren't exclusively Egyptian. They're depictions of these human-headed, lion-bodied beasts that have been discovered as far afield as Turkey and Greece. But the Great Sphinx of Giza in Egypt is by far the most famous member of the breed. There are two main differences between Egyptian sphinxes and the Greek and Turkish variety. The former invariably have the head of a man and are described as unaggressive and even-tempered, while the latter are often female and have an unpleasant disposition. So other than that, all sphinxes serve pretty much the same function: to zealously guard treasures or repositories of wisdom, and to not allow travelers to pass unless they can solve a clever riddle. And of course, this goes to all the storytelling and the legends of between the paws of the Great Sphinx in Giza, the chamber buried beneath, full of treasures and riches. It's inconclusive as to whether they found anything in there. So number 8, the last one for tonight, the Uraeus, the cobra of the gods. And you saw it on a lot of the headpieces, the little cobra. You see it all over Egypt as an adornment, and is not to be confused with the demon snake Epep. Uraeus is a rearing cobra, symbolizing the majesty of the Egyptian pharaohs. And the origins of this figure hark back to Egyptian prehistory, during the pre-dynastic period. I mean, you're going way back. The Uraeus was associated with the now very obscure goddess Wadjet, Wadjet, the Wadjet, who presided over the fertility of the Nile Delta in Lower Egypt, and lower being in the north, the Nile Delta area. And so around the same time, a similar function was performed in Upper Egypt, down south, and the even more obscure goddess Nekhbet, often depicted as a white vulture. And when Upper and Lower Egypt were unified around 3000 BCE, so about 5,000 years ago, depictions of both Uraeus and Nekhbet were diplomatically incorporated into the royal headdress and were known informally as in the pharaonic court as the two ladies. So there you go, guys. There's a real superficial overview of some of the monsters and mythical creatures of Egypt. There's more that we're going to get into, more about the spirituality, more about ghosts and spirits, the gods, the demigods, and the spirits of the dead. And we're going to start talking soon about the Egyptian gods and goddesses themselves. And so that's it for tonight. I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for giving me your time. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for spending time in the chat room. Steve Clark says, Scotty, it's in the Harry Potter movie. You're absolutely right. The Griffin in the Harry Potter movie. And so, Steve, you're welcome. Thank you for being here. And everybody, I'm sorry, when I get into talking about the topic, I don't always get to look in depth over at the chat room. I catch things every now and then. Wesley Curry said, possibly it was the chosen face for the CGI troll that tried to club Hermione in the girls' bathroom. The resemblance is obvious. Trying to see what you're referring to there. The Griffin. It's a beast of war. Like an old English, Irish, Scottish coat of arms. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I'm the Griffin, said Elderberry. So, there you go, folks. Thank you. Morgan Snow, good to see you. Didn't see you earlier. Welcome. And Barbie D, same to you. So, I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you all for giving me your time. If you are not a member of this channel, hit the join button down below and choose one of three ways. $2, $5, or $15 automatically taken out of your credit card every month or your debit card, whichever it may be, to help support this show. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all of you. So thanks for being here, and you know what? You guys live long and prosper.
You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.